Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's my pleasure today to be here with Elise Simmons, principal of Santa Barbara High School. She's got a fantastic reputation. If you talk to anybody in the Santa Barbara Unified District Cabinet or other principals or administrators, they speak really highly of her. And I wanted to just have a conversation about a lot of stuff related to education. Obviously, it's a really interesting time right now. It's a tough time. It's a challenging time with the COVID-19 pandemic. We might be sort of turning the corner a little bit. And that's what I want to talk to Elise Simmons about primarily. Welcome to the show, Elise. How are you today?
Thank you, Josh. I'm doing great. And I'm really glad to be here. And it's always nice to hear nice things about yourself. It also makes me always uncomfortable, but thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, you have a really good reputation. I told a few people I'd be talking to you for this, and they were very excited and said, oh, she's amazing, she's great. So I just wanted to dive in and talk to you. Obviously, there's been a lot of news lately with the COVID-19 pandemic related to elementary schools. There was a board meeting recently, and there's been just sort of this gradual shift in mindset of we need to reopen elementary schools. We know the cases are high. They're not as bad as they were, in January. This is sort of going to keep going up and down. We have a vaccination, but let's do what we can to open schools, and let's just try it and see how it works, because looking nationally, it doesn't look like there's a lot of outbreaks in elementary schools for the places that have opened. There are some cases, of course, where we're seeing where it's not entirely 100%. But I wanted to sort of talk to you about our secondary schools, junior high and high school. You're the principal of Santa Barbara High. What's on the horizon for high school and Santa Barbara High, and when are we going to start that conversation of when those students are going to come back?
Well, there are students back, so that's one of the things. Santa Barbara High is the largest school in our district. It has, we have 17% of the students in our entire district. They attend Santa Barbara High. And so on any given day right now, we have all of our student athletes are back. 27 of our sports are all conditioning. There's one sport getting ready to compete, our cross country team. So we have about 600 to 700 athletes throughout the week training. We also have small cohorts for our students that are struggling academically, our students that need extra support, like our moderate severe students with disabilities, our emerging multilingual students. We have performing arts on campus. Our theater is getting ready for a production, fingers crossed, that it's going to happen. And then also our dance team. So we have, on any given day, hundreds and hundreds of students on campus, and with those students come adults. And so it's a pretty active place already. That doesn't take away from the students that are at home and zooming in for their learning. In terms of shifting to hybrid learning, I think that's the question of when will we shift to that? And what that means is about a third to half of our students would be on campus throughout the entire day for classes, as well as the rest of the students would remain at home and they would Zoom in. That conversation it's sort of always there. We are talking about it all the time. There's a lot of different moves that need to be made to ensure the safety of our students and staff when that decision is made. I think as we're starting to trend, it's trending in the right direction. And secondary schools can open when we're in the red tier, which means 7 cases out of 100,000. So we're still pretty far from that. But we're also noticing some shifting in conversations around, does that have to be the number still? Or can secondary schools open up in, I like to say, the light purple tier, which is down in the teens or something. So I haven't heard much more about that. I bet we will in the next couple of weeks, especially as the elementary schools start to open. It always then sort of looks at, now secondary, it's your turn, and that gets the wheels spinning. I think at the political level, the political and state level, we're still following the county guidance right now. So
Yeah, and you raise a good point. I asked that question. I take my son to school 3 to 4 days a week for sports practice. You got to fill out the form in the morning, the crisis go, and you say he doesn't have a fever above 100.4, and he hasn't come in contact, or yeah, there's a couple questions there that I go through. And yeah, you're right. There is a lot of activity on the campus for sure. My son goes DP, so it's different experience. Do you think that secondary schools are going to be able to start this semester, or do you think that we're just going to wait till August? What's your thought on that?
Well, my hope, I found myself using that word a lot. My hope has always been we will return to in-person instruction sometime this school year.
Yeah.
And so when I think about that, I want to be always positive, but always realistic, and always take into account the safety. And I'm really relieved when I see the numbers trending in the right direction.
Yeah.
And although I do get concerned, I am worried about the impact that Super Bowl Sunday had and the gatherings that people were part of. I am worried about spring break coming. But I do remain forever hopeful that we will open. And I keep looking to term 4 as sort of in my brain, a great chance. It's the changing of a term, which means for some of our students, new classes. For a lot of the teachers and students, they sort of go, okay, now we're halfway through. It's a grading period. So that's my hope, that the data, the science matches up with our grading calendar.
Right.
And that we can return, because I miss the kids. We miss the kids so much. And we all know that in-person learning is the most effective learning, not only for academics, but mental health. And so that's my hope, that we return this year.
So let's go right there and sort of talk about the impacts of most of the kids not being able to attend school in person. We hear a lot about elementary. We know that it's very tough for children to be able to spend so much time on Zoom. Working parents, stories of parents leaving their kids at home, and maybe a neighbor will check, or an older sibling, or they'll come home and check in when they can. And those are the formative years for kids, kindergarten through 6th grade. They're developing their study habits. And so let's talk about high school and what's similar, what's different. What are you seeing in terms of the biggest impacts of students having to Zoom 5 days a week?
I think it's on the connections and the relationships. I think that has been the hardest through all of this. And anybody who knows me knows that I am a huge relational person. I'm all about relationships. And you hear the word social emotional learning. That's all about relationships. That's acknowledging those connections we have with people. And with Zoom, it's very, very hard to develop those. It takes a lot longer. And so I think first and foremost, that's like the biggest impact there are relationships, don't get me wrong. I'm watching teachers and students be creative and continue to figure out ways to connect. And I hear from teachers all the time about the wonderful connections through chatting, through journaling and writing, through one-on-one conversations. But a lot of it's the students with students. They're struggling with finding those friends. I can't imagine an incoming 9th grader. They don't even know where their classes are at, number one, on campus, right? They've never been to school at San Barbara High. And then also just the friend groups, trying to find a friend. I don't know how you make friends through Zoom when you're in class and you're focusing on learning. So that is a big area that's a big impact. And that cuts across, I think, every single sector in our society where you have to do your work through Zooming. I think people are struggling across the board in that. And the other thing, I mean, the learning is different. It is not what it, there's the hands-on learning. Teachers are doing what they can to give hands-on experience at home, giving art kits, science kits, sports medicine. I was handing out the big bags of like tape when we did textbook return. So we're doing what we can to give students the hands-on experience as at home. But that is all missing. I've sat in a class where they were doing a Socratic seminar, which is a discussion. Mm-hmm. It's very different on Zoom. You can do it, mm-hmm. and it's the depth of thinking is still there. It's just not as interactive, because really only one person can talk at a time. And if you've ever been in a Socratic seminar, it's sort of one person and then someone kind of jumps in and it becomes this nice flow. And that it's Zoom sort of makes it more awkward, maybe it's a better way of saying it. Right. What I have noticed is that, we talk a lot about wanting students to be advocates for themselves, self-agency, right. Independent learners. And so this has really forced the hand of that. And so supporting teachers and students in what are those skills needed so that a student can do this work independently if they need to. We're noticing that a lot of students are, they are now the responsible caregivers at home for their younger siblings. They are having to go to work to support the family and economic hardships. So students are having to, this gives them that ability to also learn when they can learn versus during the 9 to 3 bell schedule. But that is also really hard. I can't imagine being a 15-year-old carrying a job that for rent, for family, not just because you want spending money to buy those next cool shoes, taking care of younger siblings and doing school at the same time. So that's been hard on our students. Many of our students are struggling, and families are struggling in that way. I think the other piece of it is that when you're in person, the evidence of learning or the mental health of whoever you're in front of, it's easier to assess. And so I think that goes back to that connection piece, and that goes back to this is like through Zoom, and not every student turns on their camera. That has been an interesting, sometimes I have to negotiate with students and because I sit with them in different settings. I have a group of, it's called the Student UN. Okay. And so just negotiating with them of when the camera should be on and when it should be off. But being able to see students' work is hard, because often it's like, do you hold up your paper? Is it a Google Doc? So teachers are getting really creative with that. Mm-hmm. And then being able to see the student physically and to get to see how they're doing with their mental health has been hard. Yeah. Because I think this whole thing has deeply impacted the way we do school. But at the end of the day, it sort of highlights what I've always felt is the number one thing, which is the need for relationships and connections. And so we do whatever we can to make sure that those still are happening. Mm-hmm. And the students are learning. But first and foremost, it's the relationship piece. And then let's do some math now, so.
Yeah, in person, there's so much peer pressure that comes with traditional in-person school. And then and that's part of a young person's growth and development. And it helps other people too, to sort of learn how to interact with people who are different than you. And then you turn that in the virtual setting, but it's still there, it's like Zoom backgrounds, like what's my Zoom background going to be? And my Zoom background, does it look as good as somebody else's Zoom background? And so it's everything that people experience through in-person school. Now trying to figure that out through virtual learning is definitely difficult. And I know what you mean about the screens. You've probably seen maybe like a forehead or something with some students, or like partial, and they're trying to make a statement through their Zoom and what they look like, and all that stuff is normal stuff that kids would be doing in high school, figuring themselves out. And so it's just it's interesting. At the same time, they're going to be way more computer savvy than classes before them. They're going to be able to go in the workplace and know how to have these kind of meetings. So
absolutely. And how to use Google Docs and hyperlinks and collaborate, on them. And the other thing that I've noticed is in a lot of the students, it's like their ability to be creative, to figure out ways to still connect with each other or with the school or in our community. We have a new ASB teacher director. Her name is Kelly Ball, and one of the things that I said to her, I said, listen, we want to start shifting the culture around connections and communications with our students, and having students feel like they're connected to school. And if you've ever seen the California Healthy Kids Survey data, which here's a plug, please parents, please fill out the survey. We all need it at all the schools. And 9th and 11th graders are filling it out as well. But school connectedness, students at the high school level report such low levels of connectedness. And what it really looks like is, do you feel like you are doing things that are giving back to the community or making the community better? Do you feel like you have voice and choice in your classroom, whether it's around assignments or rules? And do you feel like, the school cares about your voice and your opinion, and you have agency within that? And so one of the best ways in my mind has been clubs. Clubs allow students to step into leadership roles. They can identify a passion, whether it's a service learning club or just a club that's educational. They have like interests. And so at Kelly Ball, I said, hey, how are you going to do this club thing? Because that's what she's like, I don't know. But out of this, we have now 25 active clubs. They're all virtual. They have a virtual website. And then we just did a second club rush, and 24 more students showed up to say, I have an idea for a new club. That's unheard of. In normal times, we're probably activating, we probably have about 25 clubs. We're now doubling it. So that speaks, when I heard that number, I was just like, that tells us that they want to be connected. They want to find ways to explore just their passions and find like groups. And a lot of them are groups that they want to give back. So a tutoring club started, peer tutoring club. And so it just, you start to see from all of this relentlessness from our students to connect, be creative, find ways to impact the community. It's pretty awesome to watch. And it sort of, I tell people, will say, well, aren't the teenagers, they just don't really care. They only care about themselves. And I'm like, no way. That is the exact opposite. If you've been around teenagers in the last 4 years, you're going to see that they're very empathetic. I mean, because of social media and what they're seeing on the TV, and they're way more grounded in what is going on around them. They care about our environment. They care about our community. They care about Black Lives Matter, and they care about justice. And it's amazing to watch. And so it's still there, even though they're zooming in. They're still pretty awesome.
Yeah, I find that younger people are a lot nicer than like my generation of that time. I mean, it's really remarkable.
Yeah.
And they're it's just like, even like customer service or something like that, so somebody my generation, it's sort of like you're more likely to get grumpy or something if something doesn't work out. But like that generation, they're so nice and they're friendly. Like they want to tip, and they're polite. It's like a whole different respect that they have, that's natural, that's not forced, that's being built in as they develop. And that's, I think, a really cool thing about how we're changing over time. We can't sort of change attitudes overnight. They come through generational change. And I think, like you mentioned, equity and justice and tolerance, we're seeing these changes live right in front of our eyes. And, by the time they're our age, hopefully it's an entirely different world, than what we may experience in 2020. Let me ask you about the achievement gap. Are you seeing the distance learning expand the gap between students who are traditionally do well and students who struggle a little bit more with the standardized tests. Are you seeing that issue getting worse because of COVID-19? And what is the school sort of trying to do to address that if that's the case?
Yeah, I'm trying to decide how I would describe if it's worse or if it's the same.
Mhm.
I think what's worse is in talking with teachers is in in-person instruction, because the students are there, you can see that evidence of learning. You can see the work that they're doing. And as they're leaving, you're like, hey, give me that assignment, right? As they walk out the door. In virtual learning, kids are there in the Zoom meeting and the teacher's like, hey, hit submit on your Google Doc or turn that through Google Classroom, and they don't. So then it's like, well, how do I and then it's a conversation of what is it, a technology thing? Like, why aren't you submitting the assignment? And I also think about a lot when I was a teacher, I taught at junior high. And so I remember kids would not turn anything in and I'd be like, come in, and we literally would go through the student's backpack and we would find all this work, all this evidence of learning.
Yeah.
And you can't do that. You can't go through a kid's backpack right now, right? And find these things of like, see, you do get that. You do understand that information, that skill. And so what teachers are noticing is that, students that there's a lot of like 0s to 14%. And that lack of data doesn't say that they're not learning. It's just we don't have the evidence to say that they're learning. And so that's the struggle. So can't say if it's worse or not. It's more of just, it's like different. And it's hard on teachers because they're like, I know they're there. And so it's like when I talk to them, I'm like, yeah, okay, you do understand it. And then they can put in like a grade or some sort of they feel like, yeah, you are learning. You're just not turning in the work.
Yeah.
And so that's the other really cool thing that has happened in all of this is a focus on how do we assess learning and versus like just what's the word I'm looking for? Just turning things in or like effort. There is effort in there, but I want to hear through the effort that you're learning. So I think that's what's really different is the students, it's like the 0%ers. There's a lot of students have 0 to 15%. And so what we're doing about that is, teachers, they do everything they can to connect with that kid in that classroom. They have them stay after, they do a breakout room with the student, they have office hours, they reach out to the counselor, they reach out to the parents. We have an amazing bilingual language access team at Santa Barbara High that will support our teachers in any sort of communication they will need to have with families that speak Spanish. And so then last case, we do home visits. Mr. Mendoza is our Dean of Student Engagement. Maria Jimenez is our family student outreach liaison. And the two of them this year have done more than 180 home visits. And so just they show up at the door and say, what's going on? And because of COVID, you have to be practicing safety procedures around that, but we do that. We're also working on increasing the number of home visits. So we're creating teams of counselors and admin that will go out and really target the students that according to their grades and our teachers that they're having a hard time engaging. So we're starting that next week and beyond because we realized 180, we have 2,200 kids, 180, we need to do some more outreach.
Right.
So
yeah,
they're not coming to us, we're going to go to them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's such an interesting concept of grading effort because when we talk about how people learn differently, some people, it's just easier for them to finish. It's easier for them to cross the finish line. It doesn't mean those who haven't done everything they possibly could to put the work in, but there's different kinds of roadblocks people face depending on what challenges they have in their own experiences, their own surroundings. And so the idea of grading effort is really cool because there's a lot of students who work really hard. It may not show in the final product, of the grade, but it doesn't mean they're not learning. You know, we've all, it may be a myth, it may be true, but we've heard, the C students, end up being a little bit more successful than the A students, because the C students, in college, they may get a C, but they remember more of it. The A students, some of them tend to cram, it's like regurgitate. They know how to get that on the test. And so, there's all kinds of different ways to measure what people know and what they've learned and their success beyond just the final grade. So that's a good conversation. I know that's happening nationally in terms of how do you reimagine sort of that grading system. I want to transition a little bit to you and your backstory in a second, but you mentioned with the home visits, some of the the health and safety issues that people have to make. What has COVID-19 been like in terms of the cases on campus? We do have, obviously, as you said, a lot of activity on campus, and so have you seen any sort of any cases on campus or spread? Or I know the district has talked a little bit about that, but in terms of COVID-19 cases, what's it been like at Santa Barbara High with the cohorts you have back?
Well, you've seen the data. It's not a bragging point, but we are number one in the number of positive cases on campus.
Yeah.
We've had 21 since September. So since September to now, we've had 21 positive cases on campus.
Yeah.
What that means, though, just so it's a little bit clear too, it means that I'll give you it's students and staff, to be clear. And what it is, though, I'll give you an example of one. We have a young person in a small cohort and hasn't attended the small cohort. The last time the student attended the small cohort was, I'm just going to give you a date, January 25th, for example. Mm-hmm. Well, we find out and mom has kept the young man home, for example, and it's like because he doesn't feel well. Well, we find out on February 2nd that the young man tested positive. So that is considered still a positive case on campus, even though he's never been on campus. While he was positive or symptomatic, it still counts as a positive case because he's part of the small cohort. So that's an example. Another example is a student comes and they're asymptomatic, or a staff member comes and they're asymptomatic, and they come to work, they go to school, and we find out later that they were positive, and then we do contact tracing. So it's a wide range of what it means to have 21 positive cases on campus. The data point that I love to say is we've had 0 transmissions, which means that someone comes onto campus at some point, they're positive. We do contact tracing. Those folks that have had close contact, they quarantine. This person's isolated, but there is no transmission. Yeah. So yes, you've had a close contact with this person, and yes, you're quarantined, but they don't have COVID as a result of that close contact with that person. So yes, we've had 21 cases, but 0 transmissions. And that's really important to me because that speaks to the protocols we have in place and the safety measures we have in place here. So close contact is also defined by being within 6 feet of someone for 15 minutes within that day. So a total of 15 minutes. And so, that can happen. Imagine, it doesn't matter if you have a mask on or not, or you're indoors or not. It doesn't matter, trust me. But when it comes to defining close contact, it's 6 feet, within 6 feet for a total of 15 minutes or more throughout that day. So that means everyone's always has a mask on. Hand hygiene is huge. We're making sure all of our classrooms and spaces are ventilation. If I'm having a conversation with someone for an extended period of time, you'll see me walking outside with that person. So I get my steps in, but it's also the safest thing to do. And so so that's a really important. And it's been hard. When I get a positive case, not only do you have a lot of things you need to do working with a nurse, and there's a COVID task force at the district, amazing support. I never feel alone in any of this. I work as a team. It's a lot of work, but it also at the end of the day, I get worried because I want to first and foremost, like, are you okay? How are you? And we've been lucky in the sense that most of the positive cases, the grand majority of them have been very mild. We've had a couple that are not, but they're healing. And so, yeah, it's a lot of safety protocols and a lot of vigilance and a lot of communication and just working together. So,
yeah. Well, that's a really good explanation, because you see the numbers, you're like, whoa, 21. And then you understand that it's a little more nuanced than that. And it isn't as though somebody came to campus and then spread it to another student who spread it to another student. And all of a sudden you have 21 students or teachers with it. It's not that at all, actually, so that's really helpful. Let's talk a little bit about you and your background. You mentioned the importance of relationships and how strongly you believe in that as an educator. And in the times I've interacted with you, I do feel that you attempt to make a strong connection. And I can imagine that is how you taught and, how you are as an administrator. So can you help me understand sort of a little bit about your upbringing and, how you sort of got involved in education and sort of what some of your experiences were that brought you to where you're at today?
Yeah. So let me begin with the beginning. I was born in North County, San Diego, and my mom and dad lived on an avocado ranch in a trailer. You grew up in Fallbrook? No, and outside Valley Center near Fallbrook.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, I was born in Escondido at Palomar Hospital. Born on 12:03 midnight, January 1st. I'm the first baby born in California in 1976.
How cool.
A little tidbit. Yeah, now you know how old I am. And a bicentennial baby. So my mom and dad lived in a trailer on an avocado ranch that eventually they built a small home there. And I have a little brother. He's 22 months younger than me. And we were there for about 5 years. And then my parents realized that they needed to not live together anymore. It just didn't work out. And so I remember it very clearly when my parents, when the decision was made. And I was one of those children that I was relieved. And so, because there was just a lot of fighting and it was just better apart. So my mom, after some fits and starts trying to find a place to live, she ended up taking us to her home where she grew up, at least close to it. She grew up in Pasadena. She attended Muir High School. And so we ended up going back to South Pasadena, where we ended up finding a rental. And that's where I spent kindergarten through high school, in South Pasadena. And it's a wonderful place to have grown up. It's those of you who know it, it's a small city. I think it's a 10 by 10 city. It's south of Pasadena. It's right off the 110 freeway. A lot of it is historical. They've been trying to build the 710 freeway through it, but they can't because of just all the different obstacles in the way. It's a beautiful little town. They make a lot of movies there, and because it's close to Hollywood. It's like a 6-minute drive to Los Angeles, maybe 12 minutes or so. But so it's just a great place to live. We lived in a neighborhood where there was, I had like a whole crew of kids. There was 25, 30 kids within my age group in this one neighborhood. We would close the street down to play kickball. And I come from a family of educators, actually. My aunt is a retired teacher. I have an uncle who is a teacher, uncle is a professor. And actually, it's a family more of, I would say, we give back, nurses and educators. That's where we come from. And so as a young child, I always thought I'm going to be a teacher. My mom used to tell stories about how she would walk into the room and she'd find my poor brother sitting there as I was his teacher, making him read and write and do things like, I think I was 4 and he was like 2.5. So she said, I always was that sort of kid. I loved reading and I loved elementary school. And I started, I think it was right about junior high was when I didn't love school so much. So I started, and that was also, I got really into soccer. I was a soccer player And I loved, that was my saving grace for everything was soccer. Not only that's where all my best friends were, that's where I could are strong. I loved it. It just, the team idea, that's where the team mentality comes from. And so soccer was really what sort of helped me get through junior high and high school. I also found I loved being I was in leadership in junior high, and then in high school I did the yearbook staff. I was in the yearbook sports editor and other things. So I found ways to connect to school beyond the academics. I did well enough to get into UCSB, but I always tell the story that I don't know if it exists still, but there used to be a comment on the progress report card that was works below her ability or works below their ability.
Huh, yeah.
The teachers frequently gave me that comment. And part of it was I just wasn't engaged. And so I always look back at that and go, why did I not, what was it that made me feel like I was bored most of the time? And to be honest, I mean, it wasn't that it wasn't challenging. I just didn't want to meet the challenge of what the teacher was giving us. And so again, so I think I look back at it, and I think for the lack of relationships were there with me and the teachers. I felt that teachers that were trying to connect with me they're trying to be my friend versus being like a mentor. And so I just sort of just didn't want to engage in that. And so for me, when I think about my high school, I just think about soccer, yearbook, and just having fun with friends. So then when I went to college, went to UCSB, and that's, by the way, where my mom and dad actually attended UCSB. That's why I chose it. They went there for a couple of years. I think my dad dropped out. They were there in 1969. So my dad was, there when the bank was burning. My mom was there. She was wiping tear gas out of people's eyes. And so my dad, he just sort of like, I don't want to do this anymore. He ended up dropping out. And then my mom stayed for a little bit, and then the school just sort of stopped teaching. And so that's where they met each other. And so I was like, I'll go to UCSB. And so that's where I went, and I did well. And I remember, I will never forget the day. It was my second year. And I remember I woke up one morning and I was like, I know what I want to do. I want to be a teacher. And it was sort of like I tapped back into my third grade self again. And I wanted to be a teacher when I was in elementary school. And I realized that I sort of came back out as a college student. It was like, I loved learning again. Like I just loved everything. I read everything. I loved talking in class. I mean, it was just great. I found it again. And then with that finding of the love of learning again, I wanted to help others learn. And that's when I realized I wanted to be a teacher again. And so I started doing things like, I worked at Devereaux for a while. I worked, I was a third grade, I worked in a third grade classroom as a math tutor, but it ended up just being a tutor for everything or just a helper. I did pre-professional work. I did what I needed. I did everything I needed to do to make sure it was the right decision, but also to get into the teacher education program at UCSB. So I ended up graduating from UCSB. I'm a Bachelor of Arts. I have double major in psychology and religious studies, which is a unique blend. It has served me well in all of it has. It's just really interesting how it sort of pops up in my life. And so then I ended up getting my teaching credential and my master's from UCSB the following year in history, social science, and then a master's in education. And I luckily got hired a week before school started at Wakumbra. And that's where it started that's where my whole educational career, I grew up in Santa Barbara Unified. I have not worked in any other districts. In August, it will be my 22nd year.
So it's interesting when you kind of said you lost your love for learning a little bit, somewhere maybe around junior high, and you were able to find it later. When you sort of found it again, was part of your motivation, or can you talk a little bit about what role did your educational experience have in your desire to teach others? In other words, did you want to sort of help the young, new Elise Simmonses out of the world who were out there to sort of help them sort of have the advantages or the understanding that you didn't have? Was any of that sort of like playing in your mind of, I want to help in ways that I wasn't helped when I was in the school system?
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I learned when I was in college was I was really angry as a young child. And so I don't know if any of you have ever heard, or if you've heard of the Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE score. Mm. So it's a questionnaire you can take. There's a lot of research around it. Some wonderful. So adverse childhood experiences, it's questions you answer, and you don't want to have a high score, because the higher the score you have, that means the more adverse childhood experiences that you've had. I have a really high ACE score. So as a child, I didn't realize what was happening. I mean, I did, but it impacted me, and it did influence how I engaged with adults in my life in junior high and high school. It influenced in a negative way. So as a college kid, I started to look back and be able to see how that impacted me. And also how I allowed it to impact me. That was the other piece of it too, is, this idea of when something happens to you, it's like, how are you going to respond to it? Well, a teenager, we respond in different ways. And so as an adult Elise, or a fairly new adult Elise, I was able to look back and see how I responded to it, and then go, start to respond to things differently. I had to start dealing with what the impacts that I had. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse, and so it's, as an adult, you have to react differently, or you're not going to be a functioning adult in society. And so I think part of it was not just the academic part that was not challenging. I think I didn't realize how much my life outside of school was impacting my life at school. And so that's another reason why, as I think about myself now, and as a young teacher, it was me helping students feel challenged, feel accepted, and feel safe, and feel and talk to them about how they do have control over some of the things in their lives, and to help them find that control and harness it in a way that was healthy. So I think that's when I go back to like how I was as a young teacher. I remember having many conversations, especially with young girls, about, they would tell me what's going on at home or something, and don't call my mom, you're just going to make it worse. And I said, well, let's talk about why I call your mom, and how do we, and I call your mom because you're not doing your schoolwork. So what can I do to help you? And what can you control in that situation at home? So I think that has really influenced just me being able to look back, and my childhood has really influenced how I engage with young people. I think about what I needed back then. And I don't know if I would have received it, to be honest. That's the other thing. And so when I work with teenagers, I know that I don't push too hard, because because I'm trying to give them what I think they need, they don't see it yet sometimes. And so you have to be persistent, you have to be consistent with them, and you just continue to care about them, and they'll come to you when they're ready.
You mentioned sort of how you were, what kind of student you were, and you had maybe a little bit of self-sabotaging tendencies. And I guess it's a compliment, I guess, if somebody says to you that you don't try as hard as you should, or you're better than you are showing. I guess it's kind of a backhanded compliment, but they believed in you. They had some potential. What would you say to sort of a young person, but, or it doesn't even have to be a young person, because even as adults, we don't always, shake these traits that we have as children. Sometimes we carry them with us forever, or they manifest themselves in different ways. But what would you say to somebody who maybe, maybe holds a little bit of anger, or has a tendency to rebel for the sake of just rebellion, and maybe kind of is their own worst enemy at times, from an academic and an education perspective? What would you say to somebody based off your experience and how you were able to overcome that? And you're a psychology major, how do you help somebody sort of see the other side of that, the other end of that tunnel?
Well, I think for me, and I think about the times where I have, I was the alternative ed principal as well. So like I've been in many different roles and working with all sorts of students across our district. And when I see it happening, I develop a relationship with them. I reach out, I tell them a little bit about me, my life. And I come from a place of, I get what you're doing, and let me help you take that, because that character trait of self-sabotage, or being able to be stubborn, or a really assertive, maybe having no filter and just speaking your mind, because you're like that. So those kinds of things, there's two sides of the coin to that. There's a positive and a negative side, and what they're doing, and I try to help them see the two sides of the coin. Or as some people, you might say, there's the balcony and the basement of a character trait, right? It's the stuff that, so it's helping them see, like, okay, let's talk about why, like, man, you are so stubborn. You're just rebelling against doing that assignment. I mean, that is a lot of strength. That is a lot of strength that you have there. So let's talk about how you could use that in a way that's going to get you to where you want to go. Where do you want to go? What's your plan? And how can I help you get there? So I think for me, it was always, I always tried to emphasize the positive aspect of that character trait. Try to see it, try to see that asset and where it comes from, and then how you just help them. It's about mindset too, and see it in a different light, and take advantage of it, because it sort of goes back. So that's how I go after it, I think, and maybe that's the psychology major in me as well, but is recognizing the dual nature of different personality traits and decisions. That's the other thing I always will talk to kids about. It's like every decision has a consequence. And I think sometimes people think consequences are negative. And I'm like, no, it's positive or negative consequence. There's always a reaction. There's always something that comes as a result of the decision. And let's think through that. And that often will come out when students will say, we're talking about like a physical altercation. And they'll say, well, Ms. Simmons, what did you want me to do? Did you want me just to stand there and not fight back? And I said, actually, I would never tell you, what do you think you should have done? I mean, think about the consequences. Are you okay with being, if you want to fight back, there's going to be a consequence as a result of that. There's going to be a consequence at school, but there's also a consequence in your peer group that might actually be a positive one. So I talk to them in that way of just helping them see things that maybe they're not seeing, and then let them process it and work through it. So
yeah, sometimes what you think is your biggest weakness or disadvantage or problem, if you just reset it, it becomes your unique trait that allows you to do anything you want and be successful. But sadly, some people never figure out how to twist that, or it changes depending on what stage of life you're in. But I think that's the key, is understanding a lot of the challenges that you've overcome as a child or a little bit later. Those are your things you've overcome, and that made you stronger, and that makes you more equipped and better prepared a lot of times to tackle the world as an adult and be more successful. The challenge is just recognizing that and overcoming it. Don't let it overwhelm you.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up, we have a new superintendent, Hilda Maldonado. I guess she's not so new. She's been here a few months now. And sort of, you're very active, you're all the principals have a role, a higher profile role, and you definitely are one of the more visible in terms of being outspoken and talking about these issues. Can you talk a little bit about where we're headed and where the district is headed in terms of having some new leadership and having some more awareness of some of the social emotional challenges that we've had? You know, we're looking at grading again. We're looking at ways to help everybody be successful in the classroom. And you know, I shouldn't say there's lots. There's some critics who are very loud about everything that happens, you know, in the district that they don't agree with. Where are we headed? You know, is this a good time to be a Santa Barbara Unified district student and, you know, parent of a student? What's your outlook on where we're going?
Well, for me, we're headed in the same direction we've been heading in, and it's you know, making sure that every I'll use our motto: every child, every chance, every day, and it's still rings true. And under the new leadership, it's continuing. And in fact, I almost feel like we're focusing even more, which is great. I mean, that's what happens. We evolve, and we're headed in the same direction, and that's the direction of serving all of our students. And the good thing around our progress. So I will say it's hard right now, and this is where maybe my traumatic childhood experiences is helping me, because it's hard because of all of the things that are happening right now. We have the pandemic, we have the this changing of our president, and then like right now is watching the impeachment trial. You know, it's like there's so much stuff going on, and just trying to remain focused on student learning is easier said than done because of the noise that's sort of coming from everything. But we're committed to that. And it is a good time. It always has been a good time to be part of Santa Barbara Unified. I mean, I've been here for 22 years. And so one of the things that I've appreciated about new leadership is, and whether it was Carrie or Hilda, is that coming in and asking really good questions and asking us, you know, wait, why is this happening? Or why is that happening? And whenever someone asks me the why around something, it forces me to re-examine it and either refine it or explain it in a way that then they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And so that refines my communication structures, right? So for me, we're headed in the absolute right direction. We're being even with all of the noise. Sometimes you'll hear us, I'll use the word stand. The sand, it's that comes from the analogy of the glass container, and if you put boulders in and then you put sand in, try to add water. It's a great thing that, you know, the sand sort of gets in the way, but you should be focusing on the big boulders, the big rocks. Mm-hmm. And we are focusing on the big rocks, although the sand seems really loud right now. So I continue to be so proud of what we are able to do. To see the struggles that my students and my staff go through every day, and at the end of the day, I'm so proud of the work, and it's a good time to be in Santa Barbara Unified. It always is a good time. Yeah. But it continues to be a good time for sure.
Well, thank you, Elise Simmons. I really appreciate you taking time. I think this is a really great conversation. And even, you know, back when I, you know, writing stories and reporting on you and the issues of the district, and, you know, it may not always be the way that the district may want to see. I always appreciate it, how kind you were in your approach, and, you know, wanting to sort of get to know, like, well, where is this guy coming from, you know? And I think that goes to the sense of the connections that you try to make with the people you interact with. And it's really good not to jump to conclusions and judgments about people, you know, and just get to know them. So I appreciate you taking time and talking about Santa Barbara High and everything that you and the district is doing. So thanks a lot.
Well, I am really appreciative, and I feel very what's the word, blessed to have been chosen to be here with you this morning. So I know it's just, for me, it's just a great opportunity. And you did promise it was going to be a casual fun conversation. And I would say I was worried, I'll be honest, a little bit worried, just because anytime I'm in the spotlight with anything, but you have made it really comfortable and fun. And I just appreciate you asking me to be here with you this morning. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. My pleasure. And I'll see you around. Take care.